the position of the Deputy President is not vacant. Haiko wazi, iko na mwenyewe na imekaliwa sawa sawa.
Wenye nchi, how are you doing? I hope you're doing fine. I'm also fine. Before I continue, remember there is a QR code on the top right corner of the screen. Scan, buy us a bottle of soda or two, and we'll appreciate. Now, last weekend, Kindiki was at Nemburu's stadium. Yeah, Nemburu Stadium, with the elders of Mount Kenya East, and he went later and said that his position, that is the DP seat, is not vacant. And it seems he's not letting it go without a fight. I want us to talk about this and look at the bigger picture and probably find the reason why he had to come out guns blazing at this time. Now, listen to this speech, then we continue.
Mimi sitawaangusha. I will not let you down. I will not fail you. I will do my work well. I will make you proud. Hata wale watu wanaongea hapa wanaongea lakini wanasema lakini huyu mtu tu ako sawa. Sijui kama mmesikia hiyo. Wanajaribu kuleta fitina. Alafu wanasema jameni hata kama tunasema so tutaendelea kukaa hapo na atubembelezani. Yeah, so pia wale sijui wanatafuta sijui kiti gani. Mimi nakubaliana na wale wamesema ya kwamba the position of the Deputy President is not vacant. Haiko wazi, iko na mwenyewe na imekaliwa sawa sawa. Kwa niaba yetu sote wananchi wa Kenya na kwa niaba ya jamii zetu sote.
Now, this little jibe, we all know who is meant for it. This is meant for ODM. And to ODM he said, hii kiti si ya kuomba. So, what we'll be asking is that, is the DP fight about to break the broad-based government? Now, as always, we'll open this with a story. Imagine you are sitting in a matatu. The driver is William Ruto. The conductor is ODM. And at the front, there is one very important seat. The seat next to the driver. That seat belongs to Kithure Kindiki. Then suddenly, the conductor starts telling passengers, by the way, hiyo seat next to the driver, tunahitaji kuiangalia tena. Maybe one of our people should sit there. Kindiki turns around and slowly says, boss, simuone niko hapa, kiti si vacant. Then the passenger starts arguing. One says, give it to ODM. Another says, no, it belongs to the mountain. Another says, why don't we just agree who will sit there in 2027? And Ruto is driving quietly, looking in the mirror, listening to everybody fight over the seat next to him. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Kenyan politics, because the fight over the Deputy President seat has officially moved from whispers in political corridors to open political warfare. And this time, Kithure Kindiki is no longer speaking like the quiet deputy who was simply happy to have survived the political storm that brought him into office. He has now looked around and basically told ODM, hii kiti iko na mwenyewe ni mimi. And that statement could have much bigger consequences than people realize. Welcome to HiiStory, where we don't just listen to politicians, we listen to what they say, what they don't say, and why they suddenly decide to say it. So, if you're new here, subscribe, because today's conversation is not simply about a chair. It's about who controls the succession mathematics of 2027 and potential 2032. Now, has Kindiki finally found his political voice? Let's start with what actually happened. On August 15th, that is probably last weekend, Deputy President Kithure Kindiki attended the Mount Kenya East Elders Solemn Assembly at Nemburu in Embu. Reports put the gathering at thousands of elders, while claims associated with the event put the attendance at more than 30,000. The elders endorsed Kindiki's leadership role in Mount Kenya East, backed President William Ruto's 2027 re-election, and called for Kindiki to remain deputy president. And Kindiki delivered the line that has now caught everyone's attention. The deputy president's position is not vacant. Iko na mwenyewe na ameikalia sawasawa. Tuheshimiane. In other words, stop shopping for my replacement. And honestly, this is probably one of the clearest political statements Kindiki has made since becoming deputy president. Because for a long time, Kindiki's political style has been almost allergic to unnecessary confrontation. Gachagua throws a punch, Kindiki gives a lecture. Gachagua says, I will defeat you politically. Kindiki says, let us maintain national cohesion. But something appears to have changed. Now, let us look at this elders' endorsement, which to me was not just a ceremony. Now, people may look at the Nemburu event and see traditional ceremonies, elders, speeches, and colorful clothes, but politically, that was a power demonstration. Kindiki had already received an endorsement from the Njuri elders in Meru earlier in August. The council backed his continued role and endorsed the Ruto-Kindiki ticket for 2027. Then came the larger Mount Kenya East gathering, and the message was becoming increasingly consistent. Kindiki should not simply be treated as Ruto's temporary deputy. He wants to establish himself as a political asset with his own regional constituency. That distinction is extremely important because there's a difference between Ruto's deputy president from Mount Kenya and Mount Kenya's deputy president who happens to serve under Ruto. Those are two completely different political equations. The first depends on Ruto. The second gives Kindiki bargaining power with the Ruto. And Kindiki desperately needs that second position going into 2027. Now, this is why the ODM DP demand is so dangerous. Remember what has been happening inside the broad-based government. ODM politicians have increasingly talked about the possibility of one of their own taking the deputy president position in 2027, and that has produced a very interesting contradiction because ODM is saying we are partners. Mount Kenya politicians are responding, partners, yes, but don't take our chair. And this is where the broad-based government suddenly discovers that power sharing is much easier to announce than to implement. Because everybody can agree on, let's work together. But when you ask who gets the deputy president, suddenly everybody remembers that they have political ancestors. Now, Kindiki now has something he didn't have before. And this is very subtle. You will have to be keen to notice. Kindiki's biggest weakness has always been perception. Critics have repeatedly argued Kindiki has no political machine. Kindiki has no crowd. Kindiki cannot compete with Gachagua. Even Gachagua has mocked him along those lines. But now, Kindiki appears to be trying to solve that problem. How? Elders, regional endorsement, traditional legitimacy, institutional position, government visibility. He is basically saying, you may have the rallies, I have the office. You may have the noise, I have the deputy presidency. You may have DCP, I have state house. And that is a very different battle. Now, of course, Gachagua responded. And he attacked Kindiki over the Nemburu meeting, accusing him of being used to divide Mount Kenya and questioning the political purpose of the gathering. Now look at the political irony. Gachagua wants to convince Mount Kenya that he is the region's kingpin. Kindiki's strategy is increasingly becoming, I don't need to fight Gachagua everywhere. I just need to establish my own legitimacy. And that may actually be smarter. Because Kindiki doesn't necessarily have to defeat Gachagua in a shouting contest. He needs to convince enough people that there is another center of Mount Kenya political power. And that is precisely what these elders' endorsements are attempting to create. But here really comes the interesting part. The 2032 issue. Now let's forget 2027 for a moment. Because this story isn't only about 2027. It's also about 2032. Several elders around Mount Kenya East have openly framed Kindiki as someone who could eventually become president. Public Service CS Geoffrey Ruku has said Kindiki has the closest opportunity of becoming president in 2032, while the Mount Kenya East elders have backed his longer-term political ambitions. So Kindiki has a huge political incentive to remain deputy president. Why? Because the deputy president's office can become his political bridge to the presidency. Remember, even the current President William Ruto, he rose to presidency through deputy president position. Look at the historical logic. A deputy president who survives a full term beside an incumbent president enters a presidential race with national visibility, government experience, networks across the country, institutional knowledge, access to national political machinery, and most importantly, a ready-made argument. I already know how to run this country. That is political capital. So when ODM says we want the DP position, Kindiki doesn't hear we want a government seat. He hears you want to remove the ladder to my presidency. And now the fight becomes existential. Now, why the DP seat belongs to Mount Kenya argument is politically powerful, but it is dangerous. Now, the argument that a constitutional office belongs to a particular community is politically powerful but constitutionally problematic. The deputy president is not legally a Kikuyu seat. It is not a Meru seat. It is not a Luo seat. It is a national constitutional office. Kindiki occupies it because he was nominated by the president after the vacancy created by Gachagua's impeachment and approved by parliament. In fact, Parliament's official record shows Kindiki was approved unanimously by the MPs present. 236 voted in favor, and he was sworn in November 1st of 2024. And in June 2026, the High Court upheld the legality of his appointment, ruling that public participation was not constitutionally required for the process under Article 149. So legally, Kindiki owns the office for as long as the constitutional arrangements allow. Politically, however, his supporters are trying to make his retention a regional bargaining issue. That's where the real game begins. Now, let's bring in Gatundu South MP Gabriel Kagombe. Kagombe recently left UDA, accusing the government of failing to deliver on campaign promises to his constituents. He specifically cited stalled Mau roads and concerns affecting tea farmers. But what made his departure politically explosive was what he said about the Naivasha broad-based meeting. According to Kagombe, a confrontation emerged around the demand for the deputy president position, with Kisii Governor Simba Arati reportedly demanding the slot and a larger share of government. Kagombe said the incident angered Mount Kenya MPs and contributed to their walkout. Now, politically, his story matters because it reveals how some Mount Kenya politicians interpreted that meeting. They apparently saw the conversation as ODM wants Kindiki's seat, and that is a very dangerous message for Ruto. Because now Ruto has two different political problems. Ruto has an ODM problem and he has a Mount Kenya problem, and the DP seat sits exactly between them. If Ruto gives the DP position to ODM, he risks telling Mount Kenya, your man was temporary. If he retains Kindiki, ODM could say, so what exactly are we getting from this broad-based government? And Ruto suddenly becomes the father of two children fighting over one bedroom. One says, you promise me. The other says, but I am already living in here. And dad is standing in the corridor saying, please, let's have national unity. Now, Kindiki's iko na mwenyewe was also a message to Ruto. This perhaps the most interesting part. Kindiki was not only talking to ODM, he was also talking to William Ruto. The message was subtle. Mr. President, I have a political constituency. Don't assume that because I am quiet, I am politically helpless. Don't assume you can replace me without consequences. And don't assume Mount Kenya East will simply watch another politician walk into this office. That is why elders' endorsement matters. Kindiki is building political insurance because if Ruto wakes up in 2027 and says, "Thank you, Professor, but we are changing the ticket," Kindiki wants Ruto to know that there will be a political cost. But there's another possibility. Now, what if Kindiki actually loses the DP slot? Could Kindiki then join Gachagua? Possible politically, but not something we can state as an established plan. Remember, these two men have had serious political differences. Gachagua has attacked Kindiki. Kindiki has hit back. At Nebure, Kindiki even referred to private efforts that he said he made to advise Gachagua before his impeachment. So this is not exactly two brothers preparing a family reunion of Nyama Choma. But politics has a strange rule. Yesterday's enemy can become tomorrow's coalition partner if today's mathematics demands it. And if Kindiki were dropped by Ruto, he would suddenly have a very political question to answer. Where do I go? And the obvious political ecosystem will be the broader Mount Kenya opposition space. That does not mean he automatically joins Gachagua, but it will create a fascinating new equation, because suddenly Gachagua could have the former DP plus the current DP within the same political ecosystem. Imagine that press conference. Gachagua: "Nilisema huyu hana watu." Kindiki: "Na mimi nilisema huyu ana arrogance." Journalist: "So, are you working together?" Both. National interest. Now, here is what I think many people are missing. The fight isn't actually about who becomes deputy president. The fight is about who gets to own the succession conversations. If Kindiki remains DP through 2027, he enters 2032 as one of the strongest possible succession candidates. If ODM gets the DP position, one of its leaders gets a massive national platform for 2032. If Gachagua remains the dominant opposition force in Mount Kenya, he controls another succession lane. And suddenly, you have three possible succession pipelines developing simultaneously. You have Kindiki, ODM's preferred candidate, and Gachagua's camp. And William Ruto is sitting in the middle. That is why the DP fight is so explosive. Because whoever occupies that chair in 2027 doesn't just get a title. They potentially get a launch pad for 2032. Now, why do we should look why Kindiki is changing his style now. For years, Kindiki's political strategy appeared to be work quietly, deliver, avoid unnecessary political fights, but elections have a different timetable. 2027 is no longer some distant horizon. It is approaching, and politicians who don't build political capital early eventually discover that political capital cannot be manufactured overnight. In other words, you cannot fatten a bull on the night of the market day. So Kindiki is doing something very logical. He is turning his office into a political base, then turning elders into political validators, then turning regional support into bargaining power, and finally turning the deputy presidency into a potential bridge to 2032. That is not necessarily panic. It may actually be political maturation. But there's a problem. The elders can endorse him, but can they deliver votes? That is the million-shilling question. A traditional endorsement is politically useful, but elections are ultimately decided by voters, and Mount Kenya West is a completely different political battlefield from Mount Kenya East. Even reporting on Kindiki's recent elevation has noted that securing East support is one thing, while convincing the wider Mount Kenya region that he can speak for it is another. And then there's Gachagua. Gachagua has already spent considerable political energy building a narrative around being the region's kingpin. So Kindiki has achieved something important. He has secured a political base. But securing a base is not the same as securing the mountain. Now, this is where Ruto must be careful. Because if Ruto wants to retain Kindiki, he must convince ODM that the broad-based government is not simply a mathematical arrangement where every partner eventually gets a turn at the chair. If he wants ODM support, he must give them enough political value to justify staying. But if he removes Kindiki, he risks creating another political problem in Mount Kenya. And remember, what has already happened? Several Mount Kenya leaders have been distancing themselves from UDA. Kagombe has left. Murang'a Governor Irungu Kang'ata has left UDA. Nyandarua Governor Kiarie Badilisha has also moved away. Kiambu Governor Kimani Wamatangi has ruled out defending his seat on a UDA ticket. So Ruto cannot afford to treat the mountain as politically automatic. So, is Kindiki fighting ODM? Yes. But I think that is only the surface. He's fighting for something much bigger. He's fighting to establish that Kindiki is not merely the man occupying the DP office after Gachagua. He wants to become a political institution in his own right. And the Nembure gathering was part of that process. The elders effectively told Ruto, if you want our support, don't treat Kindiki as disposable. Kindiki himself told ODM, stop preparing a funeral for a man who is still alive. And Ruto, he now has an extremely delicate balancing act, because the broad-based government can survive disagreements over cabinet positions. It can survive arguments over party offices. It can survive politicians exchanging insults on television. But the moment the battle becomes who controls the road to 2032, now we are talking about something completely different. And that is why I don't think the DP debate is going away. In fact, it may just be beginning. Now, here's the question for you, my viewers. If Ruto wins in 2027, should he retain Kithure Kindiki as his deputy president? Sorry, wrongly framed. Should Ruto retain Kithure Kindiki as his deputy president, or should he give ODM the position to strengthen the broad-based government? And if Kindiki is dropped, where does he go? Does he remain loyal to Ruto? Does he create his own political vehicle? Does he negotiate with Gachagua? Or does he quietly begin preparing for 2032? Because one thing is becoming very clear. Kindiki has stopped behaving like a temporary occupant of the DP seat. He is beginning to behave like a man defending his political inheritance. And as Kenyan politics has taught us, when a politician says, he KTC vacant, sometimes the real great message is, don't even think about removing me. This is HiiStory. I mean, the real message is, don't even think about removing me. This is HiiStory. If you enjoyed this analysis, subscribe, share this video and tell us in the comments, Kindiki should stay or ODM should take the DP seat. Because in Kenyan politics, the chair may look empty from Nairobi, but someone is always already sitting on it. Bye.